Hamstring tendon pain can be one of the most frustrating injuries for runners because every time you try to run, it flares up again. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I help runners recover from hamstring tendon pain and return to running safely. I'm Dr. Peralta, physical therapist and run coach, and for nearly a decade, I've helped hundreds of runners get back to running pain-free and back to racing, including marathons. So, common problem I see when runners who are dealing with hamstring pain, maybe they get a sudden pain in their thigh and their hamstring, maybe up by their butt or by their knee, doing speed workouts, sprints, or hill workouts. Sometimes they get a pop sensation with the pain, but sometimes they not. Maybe they get it the day after, right? They're limping or that area is really sore or painful. It could be sharp. And again, that pain, you could feel it near the sit bones or near the knee, right? You could feel the pain in different areas as seen in the figure here. And, often happens when runners ramp up their training volume too quickly, especially during marathon training blocks. I often see this. I'm in New York myself, so every spring or fall, as people are ramping up for the respective marathons, typically I'm in New York, I'll see people training for New York or Chicago, and then they're ramping up and they get an injury and they'll get the hamstring. Now, it's not the most common injury, but it does happen. And many runners are often following these high running days where they're trying to build up their mileage too quickly. They're running 5 days a week, 6 or even 7 days a week, thinking that they just have to keep running more and more because they're training for a marathon. And what a lot of folks don't realize that running places 2 to 3 times body weight load on your legs, which can overload a weakened hamstring tendon. And then that's where you get the pain. And if you want a copy of this Google Doc and to learn more about running without hamstring pain, I'm sharing it in my free online run group. Click the link in the description to join. So how I help runners recover? First is a proper assessment. I have to do a movement assessment to rule out if it's spinal related pain or other causes before it's assuming it's just hamstring tendon pain, because you could just point to where it hurts, but doesn't mean where you feel it is the actual cause of the pain. Sometimes it could just be a symptom, right? It's not always the root cause. And I also have to, once we rule out the back, another thing with the lower back that I want to point out, about 70, I believe it was 71 or 72% of thigh pain, where you, especially even behind the thigh, we think it's your hamstring, is actually coming from the back. So before you start going, I need to do this hamstring rehab, that's where a lot of folks get in trouble. They'll go to a traditional physical therapist who doesn't really know how to do a proper screening. They'll think it's hamstring pain, and they'll be like, man, I've been doing PT for months, but my hamstring is not getting any better. It's just staying the same, or it might be getting worse because you're doing the wrong exercises, right? So it's really important to determine the actual cause of the pain. And in many cases, it's actually the lower back that's causing the hamstring pain. So, then you'd have to do back exercises, right? But once I've ruled out the back, that it's not the back, then I'll try to differentiate, where the pain is, right? Obviously, you could point to the pain that can help. The location does help, but it's not the only factor. Also see resisted testing, like to see, okay, is it, proximal hamstring or distal hamstring? So I might do resisted prone hip extension, prone knee flexion resisted, bridge testing, like just see, hey, can you do a rep of a bridge, 2-legged, single leg bridge, and see if that reproduces pain. And then once I figure out what reproduces your pain, then it becomes pretty easy when then we start using modifications of whatever reproduced your pain to start strengthening. So if it was more distal hamstring, we might do hamstring sets. If it was more proximal hamstring up by the butt, we might do bridges, good mornings in standing or in sitting, right? Just to start loading the more proximal hamstring. And then we do isometrics. You may start with a 5-second hold, but you may even go back to a 30-second hold or a 60-second hold, do multiple sets to strengthen it. And then you just start progressing the loading on the tendon from isometrics to concentric eccentrics, right? We start progressing the strengthening. We might use resistance bands like banded curls, heel slides, bridges, deadlifts, single leg work, and eventually even Nordic curls, and also heavy deadlifts as well. And then we're training the hamstring at least 3 times a week, especially during the rehab phases. Now, once you're healthy, you could go down to 2 times a week. But while you're doing it like rehab, you're actively trying to get rid of the tendon pain 3 times a week of doing specifically hamstring-directed work. But in some cases, we might even do it 4 times a week or more. But regardless, you want to be consistent, stick with it for a few weeks, and then eventually the hamstring tendon pain is going to get less and less, and then you can progress to more power, plyometric training, right? Jump training, speed squats, speed deadlifts, speed bridges, single leg jumps, box jumps, etc. And then, make sure that that's easy, not causing you pain or minimal pain. Then you could go to a run walk progression, then from walk, go on to a structured running program. Maybe start building up your base and then go into marathon training if your goal is to get back to marathon running. So my kind of, premise when I'm working with people dealing with hamstring tendon pain is I tell them, hey, we're going to build up the healthy tissue around. So if you look at a donut, like this donut analogy, the hole is the damaged tendon, but the tissue, the actual donut itself, is the healthy tendon portion. So when we build up the healthy, maybe it starts out, it's very small, but we actually make that donut, the healthy tendon portion, bigger or stronger. So making the area around the damaged tendon stronger will make the damage appear smaller. You won't feel it as much. Your body will heal. You can actually strengthen the tendon. And the other thing I want to point out, a lot of people will run over to like PRP injections. Like, oh, I got to do PRP injection, man. It's the latest craze. The thing with PRP injection is it doesn't always work. And oftentimes I've seen it's no better than placebo. And then they end up just doing physical therapy anyway because they still had the pain after the PRP injection, even though they waited a few weeks or whatever their doctor told them to do. They still have to do physical therapy because the PRP injection alone doesn't get rid of hamstring tendon pain. I see so many people fork out cash. I'm like, I'm going to do PRP, man. I saw it. I heard about it from my friend that PRP is the latest and greatest thing. I could just inject it. And I'm an American. I know a lot of Americans just want the magic bullet. But the thing is, these things are oftentimes no better than placebo. I'm not saying that never works, but instead of forking over your cash to some PRP injection, actually just try proper physical therapy. Someone who understands how to work with runners, do a proper loading program, and you could get back to running. Right? You don't have to resort to spending thousands on PRP injection, and also made for it not to potentially work. So I just want to show you some of the other exercise variations we'll do people when I'm working with runners who are dealing with hamstring tendon pain. Here's like a kind of more beginner acute phase while you're initially dealing with like the hamstring tendon pain isometric, right? For example, a hamstring set, or like, for example, a seated isometric leg curl. Just dig the heels into a mat. You could also do this laying on a table. You could do it against a machine. There's different variations of this. You also do an isometric bridge. Right, but you also do the bridge for reps. You could do a bridge with single leg, as shown in the picture. You could do the bridge with weights. You could do it's kind of related movement called the hip thruster, where your shoulders are elevated and you lift your hips up and down against a weight for the hip thruster. And obviously then you got your deadlift, etc. So what happened after I help runners, get rid of the hamstring pain? Most of them are able to get rid of that pain within 3 months and then get back to a run walk program and then eventually running. And I've had runners do races like the New York City Marathon, Chicago, Boston Marathon as well. They've learned how to proper strength training, manage the load, and also respect proper recovery days, right? They, took my advice to, instead of running 6 days a week, they dropped down to just 3 days a week of running and could still complete a marathon that way. And then they were smart about it, taking care of the recovery and also doing strength training 2 or 3 days a week, right? They learned how to prevent the hamstring pain from coming back, because one of the biggest risk factors for an injury like this is that it will come back even though you may feel good with some rest, like, oh, I'm just going to rest for a month. The pain may just come right back the minute you start increasing the load, the mileage, the speed, etc. Because your hamstring, you never fully strengthened it. You maybe got this is where I see a lot of people run into trouble. Maybe they went to another physical therapist. They got partially better, like maybe they were able to get back to walking, but they didn't fully strengthen the tendon to handle the demands of running. So you have to make sure your body's strong enough to handle demands of running, and also strong enough so that injury doesn't reoccur. This is how you prevent the recurrence of this hamstring tendon pain. And so some of the other more advanced exercises I like is like the single leg deadlift. You could do with dumbbells, but as you get stronger, you may even do barbell. You do heavier weights, of course. You could do the hamstring curl with a band, but you could use heavier bands too. I know a lot of people are like, but bands, that's just beginner stuff, right? No, you could actually get really heavy resistance bands and do really heavy resistant banded leg curls as well. Then bridges, you could progress to bridge elevated with 2 legs, single leg on a Bosu ball for more balance component. You could, or even just put the single leg bridge on elevated on a bench. You could add weights to the single leg bridge, so the different ways to progress the bridge as well. But the point is you're doing progressive strength training to make sure you're strong, resilient, and prevent the injury from coming back as well. So I currently have 2 spots open to work with me privately for one-to-one to help you run pain-free. And if you're curious, there's a link to apply in the description. First come, first serve. So not all hamstring pain is actually hamstring tendon pain. A proper assessment is critical. Progressive strength training is essential to rebuild tendon capacity and tolerate running loads. And when returning to running, build back gradually with smarter training, such as 3 runs per week structure. So by identifying the real cause, strengthening the hamstrings, And progressing back to running the right way, many runners can recover from hamstring tendon pain and get back to running pain-free.